Open disclosure and duty of candor are terms that mean different things to different people. At MPS, we regard openness as a matter of culture. It's the right thing to do when something goes wrong. I want to introduce you to Clare Bowen. Clare has a powerful and tragic story to tell about the loss of her daughter through a medical accident. I hope we can listen to that story and reflect on what we can actually learn so that such a tragic incident could not happen again in the future. Let me introduce you to Clare.
I'm a mum of 3 small children. They've all got spherocytosis, which is a blood disorder. It means they become very anemic and require blood transfusions. My eldest daughter, Beth, was not so severely affected by it as my middle child, William. He was very, very poorly. So in January 2006, Will had his spleen removed, which stops the need for blood transfusions and stops the anemia, and he made a massive difference to his quality of life. So in the July, we decided that we were going to put Beth in the hospital for the same operation. She was getting tired and couldn't keep up with the other children at school because she just started at school. So we decided that she would go to the hospital, and we were all happy and confident about it because the same team were going to operate on her that had operated on Will. We talked beforehand about how Beth as a girl didn't want to have lines and scars on her tummy, so we talked about having the operation and the spleen removed through a lower incision, sort of bikini line incision, and the doctors were all happy with that. So we took Beth into hospital on the 26th of July, spoke to the doctors, had all the pre-op stuff done, and then she went down on the 27th of July for her operation. She went down at 1 o'clock. We didn't hear anything at all from the doctors at all. About 4 o'clock we were talking to the nurse and we were just saying, it's taking longer than we thought it would, and is everything all right? And, oh yeah, everything's fine, everything's taken a long time. And then just after 6 o'clock, the doctors and the anaesthetist and the nurses came into the tiny little room where we were, didn't give us any warning, and just told us that something awful had happened. The doctors really struggled to comprehend what had happened, I think, because it was so unexpected for them as well. And I asked the doctor, I said, is she dead? And they said yes, that she'd lost a lot of blood during the operation. They cut through a blood vessel, and that she hadn't survived, that they'd been trying to save her for about an hour and a half prior to coming to see us, but she'd lost too much blood and her brain was starved of oxygen for too long, and then she died. We got absolutely no answers at all from the hospital, and it was very difficult to get them to talk to us. When we eventually did, we found out little pieces of information about what had happened, and that they had decided at the very, very last minute that they were going to use a new piece of equipment, and instead of using the bikini line incision to remove what was a very large spleen, they were going to use a morcellator, which is a bit like an apple core, and just take out chunks of it through the portholes, the laparoscopic portholes that they'd done. And the questions that we were asking them about, have you used this before, and have you got training on this, and we were all coming back with this sort of the answers that you dread, really, in that they hadn't used the equipment before, they hadn't received training on it, they hadn't done any risk assessments on this kind of equipment. It was an adult piece of equipment that is not meant to be used on a child. The damage to Beth's body caused during the operation was extensive. They made cuts to her aorta, to her stomach, to her intestines, and it was just massive trauma, massive blood loss, all in a situation where it could have all been prevented had the doctor's mindset of going into that operation been different. It was only when we got the help of a friend who had a medical background to come with us to a meeting that we really started being able to ask the questions that really needed asking, the questions that raised the issues with the hospital as to what they'd done. Why did they throw away all of the equipment they would use that night? Why didn't they keep the blood that Beth had lost? Why did they not try and retrieve the items when we'd asked them, even though they were still at the hospital? Why did they put the morcellator and all of its parts back into use? They didn't know at that point it wasn't a faulty piece of equipment, yet it was used on other further operations before it was tested, and everything that could have given us clear answers they disposed of immediately, and they cleared the theatre immediately after Beth's death. And it didn't allow us to get the answers that we needed to find out what had happened, why it had happened, and to stop it happening again. The surgeon who carried out Beth's operation had only ever done 3 laparoscopic surgeries before Beth, of removal of a spleen, and we did find out that Williams had been her first. And she then had this idea in her mind, in her head, that even though it was new to her, and even though the procedure was new to her, and even though she had a more experienced doctor in the room with her, although outside the operating area, she thought that introducing a new piece of equipment and another step into the procedure was okay. And that was something that, as parents, we couldn't understand. We couldn't understand why a doctor would allow themselves to be in a situation where they were already doing something relatively new to them, something that what they weren't completely comfortable with. That proved that she wasn't completely comfortable with it, because she had another doctor there. She still felt like she needed that support, yet she was still prepared to bring in more complex issues into the theatre, into the surgery. And I don't think she understood, I don't think anyone in the operating theatre that day really understood the technique and what they were doing. They had no training, formal training whatsoever on it. They had 5 minutes sort of talk about it before Beth's operation. The nurse who was asked to put the morcellator together had never seen it before, so she didn't really know what she was doing. No one in that room had the confidence of what they were doing, yet no one felt they could stand up and say anything. No one felt that they had the authority, the ability to just stop, and if anyone in that theatre that day, I really believe anyone had stood there and just said, look, can we just stop a minute, can we just step back? We've had no training, we've done no risk assessment, we've not really thought this through, is this a good idea? We received nothing really in terms of an apology before or after the inquest. They admitted they failed in their duty of care, and after more discussions, they issued an apology of sorts, in that they said they were sorry they had failed to prevent Beth's death. Now, to me, that's kind of a false apology, in that they didn't fail to prevent her death, they caused her death. The inquest, it took a long time for us to get to the inquest. It was about 18 months after Beth died. So in the lead up to that point, we'd had various conversations with the hospital where we'd asked them multiple times, do you have any more information for us? Do you have anything else you can tell us? Because it's kind of getting to the point where if we didn't ask the question, we weren't given the answers. So we had a 3-day inquest where we had a solicitor with us. Unfortunately, the only way that we could afford a solicitor was to take legal action against the hospital, which is something we never really wanted to do. It's not about money, it's about answers. We had a solicitor with us, and the hospital obviously had their solicitor. And the only way I can describe the experience from a parent's point of view is like being tortured. And you can't leave, you can't escape it. You have to listen again and again to people telling the story of Beth's last hours. And you have to to listen to what they say and to try and put it all together in your head, and it's just horrible. It's a horrible experience, and things came out during the inquest, and the information that we found and the points that they raised were just completely contrary to what they'd been telling us in the months previously. They produced photographs of the theatre, and they produced information on Beth's health and the medication she'd been given that we weren't told about previously. They told us about that they'd used this morselator, that they told us that a trainee surgeon was actually the one physically holding the equipment. He wasn't even allowed to do surgery on his own, yet he was allowed to use this piece of equipment that we'd never heard of previously on our daughter, that we hadn't even been consented to them using. They admitted during the inquest that they hadn't got consent from us to carry out the operation that they did carry out. I left the inquest room while they showed pictures of Beth's autopsy. But Richard felt, my husband, he felt that he'd failed Beth already in allowing the hospital to do the operation, so he remained in the room, and I think those pictures haunted him. I don't think it's something that anyone should ever see, a picture of their child cut up on an autopsy table. And the striking thing for me during the inquest was the arrogance and just complete disregard by the medical profession that were in the room for our feelings and for the part that they played in Beth's death. I think doctors and medical staff need to be confident in their own ability. Someone who hasn't got a sense of detachment isn't going to put a knife to a child. And I don't for one second believe that you can be all emotional and all. You have to have that kind of detachment to be able to do those kind of things, but at the same time, you have to be able to see that you can be better. I think the attitude of the medical profession needs to be one of, I am good, I am brilliant at what I do, but I can be better. And I think by calling their own mistakes, by seeing what they can do better in an operation, what they can do better in their surgeries, what they can do better when they're walking around the hospitals, that's the attitude that needs to change, because at the moment some are too arrogant to believe that they could be any better or they can make a mistake. And I think when you have the attitude that I can't make a mistake, you won't see a mistake heading for you. You won't see when you're heading for it straight on. The Health Select Committee wanted to look at incidents where hospitals hadn't been open, where they hadn't made discussions. They hadn't had discussions afterwards with the parents, and they hadn't been open, they hadn't been honest with them. And I do think that patient stories really can make people understand why it's so important. And I was pleased that the Health Select Committee were looking at these stories and were looking at the incident that had happened. And they came up with some very, very good ideas and ways to drive things forward. But I don't think it's always about rules, and I don't think it's about making people do things. I think it's about the support that can be provided. I don't necessarily think that bringing in a law to enforce open candor and openness is necessarily the right way forward. It's part of the right way forward. I think the Health Select Committee report generated a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue and a lot of interest in the subject that wasn't there before. And I think it was the catalyst to a lot of change. but I do think there's still a long way to go. Change has to come both from the bottom and the top of an organisation. If you have fantastic junior doctors going into the hospitals with this newfound knowledge and belief that there is a different way to do things, there is a new way of doing things, it doesn't have to be behind closed doors and all secretive. But if you don't have the other side of it supporting you, the board and the senior doctors, if they're not supportive of these things, if they don't believe truly that openness and candor are the way forward, then nothing can change. It has to be taken on by everybody, and it has to be championed by the board, because ultimately the board and the senior doctors are the ones that can facilitate the changes. You know, the people on the ground, the doctors, the nurses, the junior doctors, they're the ones who will really make the difference. But it has to be supported by everyone, it has to be believed in by everyone. And I think what's really important is that a new doctor, a new surgeon can go into a hospital and they can stand up to the culture that is currently there, that they see as wrong, and that they will then be supported by their seniors for making those choices. And yes, sometimes you will stand up to someone, and sometimes you will ask a question of a senior doctor, and sometimes you'll be wrong, but you shouldn't be berated for being wrong. You should be rewarded for asking the questions. You should be rewarded and praised for being strong enough and having the courage to say, can we just stop? I'm not happy with this. Can we just check that this is right? And instead of that frustrating the senior doctors and the management, they should see that as a fantastic opportunity. I can't do anything now to bring my daughter back. My daughter's gone, and I can't do anything for her anymore. I can't help her. But what I can do is to make sure that people understand that when you do something, you need to understand what you're doing. You need to consider what you're doing and the people around you. You need to work as a team with the people around you and surround yourself with good people. And I want people to understand that once you have made a mistake, once you have been in a situation where you've done something wrong, or a situation out of your control has gone dreadfully wrong, that you need to be open and you need to be honest about what's happened, and you need to be able to allow yourself to be found at fault, because that is the only way that people can improve. No one can truly understand the pain of losing a child unless you've been there. But if you can think, even just for a second, when you're going into a situation where you could put someone's life at risk, if you can stop and just think for a second of the pain that I feel every single day, then I know you'll do the right thing.
Now that we have listened to Clare's powerful and tragic story, a question to ask ourselves is, could such an incident be avoided in the future? That's the key. No healthcare professional goes to work to harm a patient, and no patient goes to a healthcare professional to be harmed. When such an incident happens, it's our duty to question what we do in the hope that such an incident can be avoided in the future.